Welcome back to the Abide Project. My name is Pastor Lloyd Hemstreet.
And I'm Pastor Cam.
We are at Synod once again. Yep. It is Monday. The Synod has just broken for dinner, so we're not through all of the information, but we thought it'd be time to check in and give everyone an update on what Synod's been accomplishing.
And there's been quite a bit today.
There's a bunch. If you go online and look at the committee reports, we got a whole bunch of them with strike-throughs because Synod's moving along, making a lot of good progress. Since Friday, though, there was sessions on Saturday, not just a morning session as was planned, but they also got an evening session in on Friday. So in the morning session, we had Elaine May. We had talked about last time that she was going to come and speak on the Gather events. She reported on that, 10 events that they held over the last 16, 18 months, whatever it was. They had all 49 classes of the denomination participate. And I think the number was 630 some different Christian Reformed churches were represented in those that came together at Gather. And so that's a very powerful, broad section of our denomination that was able to participate in that. One of the things that Elaine talked about that they learned from Gather is, there are many churches that are struggling with different things, but at the same time, we learned at Gather that there's many churches that are being blessed in all those same areas. And so the idea from Gather, one of them is that we need to continue to connect with one another, rely on one another, that as one church is struggling in this area, there's other churches in their classes or in other classes that are the Lord's really blessing in that area. And so we need to be able to work together. The other thing that was really brought forward from that presentation is Thrive has resources to address many of the things that churches are struggling with. And so getting them connected with Thrive was highlighted as well.
And that's a biblical thing too, right? Because iron sharpens iron.
Right.
These are ways in which we can encourage and uplift one another, spur one another on to good deeds.
Absolutely.
I think the Apostle Paul wrote in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So
and 1 Corinthians 1 talks about when we go through hard and challenging things, the Lord teaches us in the midst of those things how we can go ahead and be a blessing to others. And so those churches that are struggling and learning, we need to be sharing what we're learning from the Lord with one another. Yeah. So that was the morning session, and they were making so much progress with the advisory committees that they had an evening session as well. So the things that were covered in the Saturday evening session, they didn't have anybody voting on anything, but they did receive the report from the Council of Delegates, the chair of the Council of Delegates, Michael Tenhaken. One of the things that he highlighted was the important work of the Bible Translation Committee, the Bible Translation Committee. And one of the things that they'd been asked to review a little while ago is the NIV, I think it's the Easy Reader edition, and asking, is that really profitable for worship or not? And what they got a great report that they brought to the body talking about, well, these are the strengths of it, but these are the ways that it's not that fitting for a worship Bible. And so they talked about it could have other good uses and it could be a resource for other things. Yeah. Then the vice chair of the Council of Delegates, the chair of the Canadian Ministry Board, Miss Greta Lumens, spoke, and she talked about the challenges that we all recognize our denomination is going through currently. There's congregations disaffiliating. There's all kinds of economic pressures that have come on the denomination. And for those that are in covenant together, it's our responsibility to work together with ministry shares, with direct contributions to the various agencies that we want to come alongside and support. So those were the reports from our Council of Delegate chair and vice chair. Then the second report for the evening was from our General Secretary, Zach King. And General Secretary Zach King, he talked about, he had kind of this theme of happily ever after, and talked about how, this isn't exactly the happily ever after synod. I don't know that any story in a simple world actually gets to happily ever after, but we did look at the progress that we were making. And he pointed to Ezra 3, and that passage that talked about the Babylonian captivity coming back and rebuilding the temple, and how that those that were coming together were both celebrating the temple's foundations being laid, as well as those that were weeping because it was so much less than what Solomon's temple was. And so that gave a really good picture for this time, this place that we're in as a denomination, and the things that we're going through and experiencing right now, that there's joy and sorrow mixed together. But the undeniable truth is God is fulfilling his promises, and he continues to be at work. He talked about where we've been with that there's churches. I think the list was 20 churches that have already celebrated their 150th anniversary in our denomination. And Kellogg'sville CRC actually today was given a plaque, a recognition, as this year they're celebrating their 150th, which will make 21 churches.
That is a long.
That's a lot of good measure.
Of good and faithful service.
It is. It is
really cool.
Then he talked about where are we going? What are some of the things that the Lord's doing through various churches in our denomination right now? And so that was the wrap up kind of his idea, or his State of the Church address that the General Secretary gave. Then the other item that we had over the weekend was on Sunday night, 5 p.m. Sunday night. I wasn't able to catch it then because I was in second service at my church, but I was able to go back and watch the live stream, and it was a very profitable service. I really appreciated a lot of the scriptures reading. They read the Nicene Creed together, lots of beautiful music. And Nate Van Dennen, the pastor Nate Van Dennen, we brought him up before. He preached a very powerful sermon on Hebrews, the end of chapter 11, as well as the beginning of chapter 12. And just this idea of persevering in the faith and that encouragement. So that was what took place over the weekend.
And I know a lot of these Synod delegates, you're coming to this, maybe some of them for the first time, maybe some of them have been doing this, 7 or 8 times they've been nominated to come as a delegate to Synod, and that message of perseverance, that's a good one, because you have to really slug it out. Not just through your advisory committee meetings, but then through the plenary sessions, which began today.
And so we got going. The first thing that we had this morning was not plenary, but the ecumenical guests.
That is correct.
So we had a number of ecumenical guests. Was it?
6 in total. They came from, and I kept them here quick, the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, which represents a bunch of evangelical-leaning denominations. They do a lot of public policy, education, things like that. There was the RCA, which, of course, we are in a church of communion with. Reverend Eddie Alamon, who's their general secretary. He would never have been normally available for this, but they had their synod last week instead of this week.
There you go.
He showed up and gave a bit of a state of the RCA address, and it was tough to hear because he acknowledged it. They're going through a lot of restructuring, a lot of downsizing. A number of the decisions that they've made in the RCA, folks have been leaving, and it's been difficult for them as well. So. Certainly, for sure. We heard from somebody from the Netherlands Reformed Church, the actual Netherlands Reformed Church, not
from
some of the
Netherlands.
Yeah, from the Netherlands, not some of the the NRC folks you find around Norwich area. My Ontario people, you'll understand that one. We had a representative from the Reformed Church in South Africa as well. Christian Reformed Church in South Africa. And from this Christian Reformed Church in Sierra Leone. And I think a lot of people really loved his presentation. That was Moses Jawara. He did a really good job of talking about where the gospel is flourishing, what kind of the elements are that they're working against, not even just hostility to Christian teaching from a majority Muslim country, but even the growth of things like the prosperity gospel.
Pushing back against that and bringing the true gospel.
Exactly, yes. And then there was the Global Christian Forum, which is kind of an ecumenical group. It was represented by Dr. Natasha Klukach. Klukach, I think. And that was, just kind of an ecumenical discussion body. That was kind of what I gathered from her presentation. So
very good.
And then we got into the work.
Then we got into the advisory committee work. They started off with a kind of a some simpler work. Some of the committee 7 related to finance work and recommendations. There were a number of recommendations from the COD that were addressed by different committees. Those were all approved today. Kind of the first big item, the first bigger, heavier item that we took up was from report 1D, and that was the appeal of Classis Toronto. That was an appeal, and normally appeals aren't handled in open session. Normally appeals aren't shared with everyone, but this was a very different kind of appeal because Classis Toronto had made some decisions regarding the the decisions of Synod 24 and the way they were going to handle it. And there were 5 different churches in their classis that had appealed that. And so Synod and the General Secretary's office and the COD had said, no, this is something that we all need to discuss together. It's not involving one individual or anything like that we need to keep it confidential. And so that was brought before the body.
Yeah. And the background for that, I think, would be good to get into here too, right? Because Classis Toronto initially, when they met together that first time, they did not seat delegates from churches that had those letters of protest that we talked about last year, or were, openly saying, things that go against our confessional identity. But there were a couple of overtures at that initial meeting of Classis Toronto that said, let's seat the delegates from churches who are under limited suspension.
Let's go ahead with it anyway.
It was then reaffirmed in the February meeting of Classis Toronto, and that's when I believe those 5 churches then, got together and said, we need to appeal this.
So what Synod decided today was they went ahead and they upheld the appeal, in that they declared that, yes, Classis Toronto was out of line in the way they're trying to handle this, that was not faithful to what Synod 24 had asked and requested. And so that was how they went ahead and handled it today. They didn't pursue any further discipline, but they just called Classis Toronto to go ahead and respond in faithfully following the directions of Synod.
And I think part of that was the advisory committee there. We should talk about their work too a little bit, because they were persuaded by the direction that I think Classis Toronto was moving in. That Toronto was wrestling with how to implement these decisions well.
And so what Synod said was, this wasn't the way to do it, but we want you to come along and we want you to come in line. The other items that were kind of, there was some talk about item 4C that was covered today. That was an education committee report specifically on Calvin University's board. And responding to Calvin University's report, one of the things that the advisory committee had with their recommendations was that, it kind of sounds like from your report that you're only expecting 51% of your board members to be in a confessional alignment, that just a +1 majority. And so the future president of the board, he doesn't start till October, but he came and assured the advisory committee that that is not what they're trying to do, that he was able to bring some clarity to that no, they're seeking broad alignment with the denomination and really seeking to make that a priority. So,
and that was pretty cool. They allowed him as well, not even just to speak to the advisory committee, but then he also addressed Synod along with the provost, Noah Tolley.
They got 5 minutes, might have been closer to 10. That's how Synod.
It was definitely more than 10.
But anyways, all the delegates had the opportunity to listen in and hear what was going on. Other big items, item 2D was all of the synodical delegate work. Our synodical delegates have been very busy with lots of things going on. One of the things that they covered was retirements. We had 52 retirements in total. I believe 49 ministers of the word, 3 commissioned pastors that they regretted that they hadn't totaled up all the years of ministry and service, but just thanks for all the good service done that the retirees put forward. However, there was a lot of heavy work that they went through this year too. Some Article 17s as has become somewhat normal, and then a number of Article 14 separations and of those that are ordained in the CRC that have left the denomination. And so it was a 34-page report this year that normally it's a larger report, but that just shows the kind of changes that have been going on and that our denomination has been wrestling with.
Yeah, and the way that sort of works out too, if you have an Article 14, that means you are leaving ministry. You're done. In the Christian Reformed Church, usually to enter a non-ministerial vocation, but in some cases to move to a different denomination. And I think we've got a lot more of that this year. Article 17s, generally, that's just separation between the church and the pastor. So
and that can be for a various number of reasons.
There's all kinds of reasons for that.
Health issues, pursue further education, or conflict in the local congregation.
So, 94 pastors was leaving via Article 14 this year.
That was a big number.
Another 20 out with Article 17s.
Okay.
But we did have, you know, and this isn't nearly going to cover that number, but we also had some people coming in too, right?
Examinations that they covered in that report too.
There were 6 pastors who came in from outside denominations. There were 21 former candidates who were approved for ministry.
Examined and called.
There were 38 new commissioned pastors. There were also 3 who were commissioned, but just for specific terms.
So there's a lot of ministry happening.
There's still a lot of ministry happening.
It kind of goes back to what our General Secretary said with Ezra 3, both reason to rejoice as well as reason to mourn, all mixed together. The other item that I want to talk about briefly is item 5A. It is the year 2025. And that is the 1700th anniversary of the Nicene Creed. And so that is something that our denomination certainly gives thanks for. That is the broadest of our creedal statements. That's held by the most Christians all across denominational lines. And so fitting on the day that we heard from our ecumenical guest that we could go ahead and affirm that. And so Synod encouraged that to the churches as well as to the General Secretary and our agencies to go ahead and promote this these beautiful words of who God is and His Trinity and unity, and how that draws us together with other brothers and sisters across many denominational lines. So that was a busy Monday morning. Lots going on.
We barely covered half, I think, of what happened. I think we just kind of hit the major notes.
We tried to hit some of the bigger notes. But anyway, the Synod delegates are doing a lot of faithful work. We want to continue to uphold them in prayer, give thanks for the good work that they're doing. And they're going to continue on this evening. I believe they're going to be taking up the report on medical assistance in dying. And so that's a heavier discussion that they're going to be having tonight. So continue to keep the delegates, hold them up in prayer, and we will be checking in with you again to give you an update on what else Synod decides in the next few days.
We'll see you then. Blessings.